and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A drought has been declared in parts of southern, central, east and southwest England. It means more water companies can begin announcing stricter measures to conserve supplies. Months of dry weather sees millions of people facing hosepipe bans, with Yorkshire Water becoming the latest firm to announce one from the 26th of this month. A 4-day amber warning for extreme heat from the Met Office is currently in place for parts of England and Wales. Speaking to us earlier, meteorologist John Hammond said we must be careful about our water usage.
I think it's just a wise move for us to sort of restrict our water usage to some extent now, because big problems could lie ahead, as I say, if we carry on with this dry theme. And although it's going to be wetter next week, and yes, you'll think it's kind of back to normal because the temperatures will fall by 10 or 15 degrees, that is really papering over the cracks of what is a much bigger issue beneath the ground, where groundwater levels will continue to fall unless we have sustained wet weather.
Boris Johnson has insisted there will be further cost of living support for struggling households. It comes as a new price cap prediction claims the average family's annual energy bill could reach £5,300 by April next year. The forecast reflects the rapidly rising gas and electricity prices. Speaking on a visit to North Wales, the Prime Minister said the government was taking short and long-term measures to combat the energy crisis.
Cash is not only coming through now and has started to come through, but will continue to come through over the weeks and months ahead.
But the people saying it's not enough. It's not enough.
And in addition, what we are doing is making sure that we have the fiscal firepower, we have the cash to help people more at those two key points, in October and in January.
Well, of course, one of Boris Johnson's potential successors is Rishi Sunak. He's claiming he's ready to find £10 billion worth of support for those struggling with the cost of living this autumn. The former Chancellor's argued for direct payments to the most vulnerable, such as pensioners. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, meanwhile, stood by her economic policy at the Cheltenham Conservative hustings last night, saying her priority was to cut taxes. The UK economy shrank by 0.1% between April and June, according to official figures. The Office for National Statistics says the phasing out of COVID-19 spending is partly to blame. The big fall of economic growth in June, it says, was partly caused by the extra bank holiday to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Well, Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi says he's looking at additional ways to help vulnerable households.
My task was to make sure we get the £37 billion out into people's pockets. We're midway through that, so in the next couple of months people will see their bills reduced by £400. The most vulnerable, 8 million, will get £324. So my message to the viewers is we're looking at all the options of what additional help we need to bring in later on in the winter months, in December and January. Work those up so they're ready to go from the 5th of September when the Prime Minister walks into number 10.
Tributes are being held in the city of Plymouth today, marking 1 year since 5 people were killed by a gunman in Kiam. A civic ceremony has taken place at the Minster Church of St Andrew and a community vigil will take place later. Jake Davison killed his mother following a row and then shot 4 others. After the attack, he turned his weapon on himself. In In other news, the FBI was looking for classified nuclear documents during the raid of Donald Trump's Florida home on Monday. That's according to local media. It comes just hours after the US Department of Justice made a request to the Florida court to unseal the search warrant. The unveiling's been welcomed by the former US president. Trump's calling the search a political attack. The raid was part of an investigation into his handling of official presidential documents. Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other for the shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Reports suggest it was struck 5 times yesterday, with shelling coming close to facilities storing radioactive material. The UN's calling for the plant to become a demilitarised zone. And the shortlist of potential host cities in the UK for Eurovision 2023 has been released. 7 are on it: Birmingham, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle and Sheffield. The UK was chosen to host the contest after organisers decided it couldn't be staged by this year's winners, Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark, or over to Mark, I should say, for On the Money.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Yes, ready and waiting, and coming up on the Money today. Liz Truss says that profit should not be a dirty word, but why does she think windfall tax are 2 words beyond the pale? And the current Prime Minister outlines what the new government might be thinking of in helping our energy bills, but don't hold your breath for any details. It's official. We are now in a drought. We'll be analysing what that means for our farmers and fruit growers. Britain is parched in the extreme heat and the lack of rainfall too. And we're not alone. Germany's seeing the economic lifeblood of the River Rhine drying up, starving the country's economic engine room and pushing Europe's electricity prices to a record high. Plus, each day on The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Today, we're talking to Fiona Eastham about her potent mix of chocolate, petrol and oil. Yum, yum. All that coming up later in the show, so stay tuned. This is GB News. I'm Mark Longhurst sitting in for Liam, and you're on The Money. So let's talk dirty, as Liz Truss would have it. Yes, at the latest hustings in the very genteel surroundings of Cheltenham, she declared that profit should not be a dirty word. And there's a lot of it about at the moment. Profit, that is. Even Nadeem Zahawi, the Chancellor, has noticed, saying that the dirty words, profits, that the electricity generating companies have been seeing are, quote, beyond wildest expectations. Now, remember that the latest figures from Centrica, the owners of British Gas, who also supply electricity, of course, saw operating profits of £1.6 billion for the first 6 months of this year. So everyone was expecting yesterday's crisis meeting at Downing Street to acknowledge, well, that there was a crisis. Yet the combined talents of the Chancellor, the Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, and then at the last minute, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who popped in for a nice photo opportunity around the table with the energy bosses, well, it all came up with nothing, it seems. No handouts, no windfall tax, not even some stern words for the energy companies. But then last night, Liz Truss was happy to utter a few more dirty words, windfall tax, as there won't be any, while this morning on GB News, the chairman of the Treasury Select Committee, Mel Stride, a Rishi Sunak supporter, indicated they may be thinking of one, but certainly weren't going to be calling anything as dirty as a windfall tax. So, a crisis continuing in energy pricing, and that current other crisis, inflation, just beginning, it seems. Today's latest growth figures from the Office of National Statistics showing there isn't any growth. And here's a handy graphic to explain it all. Yes, we're heading down. Growth in negative territory, only by 0.1% for the second quarter of the year, but accelerating in the month of June, down 0.6%. Now, although remember, it takes 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth to actually call a recession officially, we're not quite there yet. But there's another crisis, if you hadn't noticed too. The amber heat alert and the official drought now being called by the Environment Agency. Well, many of you observant GB News viewers and listeners have been telling us, yes, it does get hot and dry in summer. That's what it's supposed to do. But this time it may be different, because this morning it was announced that European electricity prices have reached a record high. The benchmark price, German baseload, has reached €452.50 per megawatt hour. Crikey, I hear you cry. Well, to convert that into plain English, it's just gone up another 5% and is now actually 5 times higher than it was this time last year. Why? Well, the prolonged summer heatwave has disrupted generating capacity, low wind speeds for all the wind turbines, and now no water in the Rhine to transport coal deliveries to Germany's engine room. Whatever dirty words there are in the German language, they were likely to be using them all this morning. Well, hopefully no dirty words from now on. We're joined by Nikolai Hubble, editor of Fortune and Freedom, also by Laura Dickinson, member of Enough is Enough campaign, created by individuals struggling with the cost of living crisis, and Catherine McBride, joining us in the studio, fellow at the Centre for Brexit Policy and our economist today. Welcome to you all. Thanks for being with us. Louise, I think probably first to you as a member of Enough is Enough. Talking about enough is enough, many people would have been throwing their arms up in frustration after this government crisis meeting with seemingly still no plan out there.
Yeah, completely. This is why we decided to put the Enough is Enough campaign together. It's a cross campaign of trade unions, of community groups, and everyone at home who has just had enough. I'm a young person, I'm looking at my future, and yet rents are going up. There doesn't seem to be any chance of me getting a house anytime soon. And it just feels like everything is being designed to penalise us. I look at my mum. She's worked in the NHS for nearly 20 years of her working life. We're now looking at spending a quarter of her wages on energy. How is this sustainable anymore? When has enough got to be enough?
Okay, and Nikolai, obviously there's a lot of politics and positioning around this at the moment because we are waiting for a new government. But surely there's certainly been some kind of idea what the structure would be so people can prepare, because obviously the direct debits are coming through the letterboxes now.
Well, yeah, the bills are coming, but what's the underlying problem here? Is it the price or is it the supply of energy? The price is the consequence. You've got to sort out the supply. And there's all sorts of issues there with, the green transition, the war with Russia, and so on and so forth. But nobody seems to be actually addressing the underlying issue. The best way to solve an energy crisis is to add more supply, and that solves the price problem by itself as well.
And where would you suggest that supply comes from? Because obviously we're being told that a lot of nuclear power stations are going to have to go offline. Coal-fired power stations in mothballs, even though they can be brought in. And clearly, as Germany have found, we've got the wrong type of weather to get the wind turbines going.
It's quite simple, really. End the sanctions on Russia. It's not that difficult.
Really?
The sanctions are harming European economies more than harming Russia.
Are you suggesting we do that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's lots of politicians in Europe suggesting so. And sanctions are supposed to do more harm to the person getting sanctioned than the country doing the sanctioning. And that's not happening right now. There's much better ways to try and oppose what Russia's doing in Ukraine. But sabotaging our own economy to do so is not the best way.
That would be rewarding Putin for what he's done to Ukraine.
It's not a reward, it's a rescue of your own economy. I think it's only a matter of time with winter coming before this is a well-accepted position, that it's sabotage of your own economy to persist with these sanctions. And the price pressure and the political drama that's happening right now, that all can go away. It's not that difficult. We're doing this to ourselves.
Some of the people in Ukraine may actually differ with that opinion. That may all go away. But let me just bring in Catherine here in the studio, Catherine McBride. Novel idea. Let's just forgive Putin and get everything back on stream again.
Actually, I agree with Nikolai that if you have a supply problem, you actually have to encourage more supply. And that's why I'm very anti-windfall tax, because that is taxing the people who we want to actually produce more energy. However, I would not be looking for Russia to supply that. The UK has the ability to supply it. But unfortunately, for the last 5 years, we've had a government that has actually prevented people from developing oil and gas sites and fracking sites. And even when the government grants permission, we've had Greenpeace blocking that by taking them to court.
Yeah.
So there are 3 big sites that should have been up and running years ago and are still being held up by the courts.
Fracking might come back on the agenda. We're getting obviously signals about that in terms of looking at what that could supply. But just to return to windfall tax, which clearly is a dirty word for Liz Truss, or two dirty words.
Well, it should be.
However, people are pointing out that the windfall tax on the petrochemical companies, Shell and BP, for instance, BP returning shares to shareholders, buying shares effectively, because they had so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. They haven't reinvested it in the industry. So therefore, why not put that through for a one-off windfall tax?
Because that's why companies raise money to invest it. And they will only raise money through an IPO or a rights issue if they've got a really good idea of how they get a return on that investment. Right now, both BP and Shell are in the twilight era of their industry, if you like, where the government has told them their main product, will be illegal by 2035. So they're getting out, and it's good if they buy back shares. That allows investors to get their money out.
Right.
Because companies are not forever. Companies come when they've got a good idea and they disappear. Usually we're used to them going bust, but the other way, a better way, is for them to start buying back their shares that they've sold through issues through the last 50 so years. And now they'll buy those back and eventually close themselves down.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder whether, in fact, the oil industry may well have a bit more life left in it as a result of this, a bit beyond 2035.
It should have. But
however,
with our government and with Greenpeace, what choices do they have?
Yeah. I mean, just to return to this crisis meeting at number 10, nothing emerged in terms of acknowledging a crisis, but interesting words from Nadeem Zahawi, the profits being seen by the electricity generators as beyond wildest expectations. Centrica, the owners of British Gas, who also supply electricity, obviously, 1.6 billion operating profits for the first 6 months.
But that's from their wholesale gas as opposed from they actually are limited on the profits they can make per household. So we actually do have limits on the per household, but if they also own a separate wholesale business that's creating gas, then that's where they're making their profits. And that is entirely to do with the fact that we've closed down supply by making it difficult for people to open up new wells here. Yeah. We've relied on Russian gas. What could possibly go wrong? Well, now we know.
Yeah, OK. Let's just head back to Nikolai and to Laura before they go. Nikolai, clearly Nadeem Zahawi does think that maybe there's a case for a windfall tax, even though perhaps he doesn't want to actually go through the details at this stage.
Yeah, I remember this from Australia with the mineral resources rent tax. By the time the government announces a tax on windfall profits or super profits, they tend to be in their last gasp and they tend to be disappearing pretty damn quickly. So I think this is a sign that the crisis is not going to last that much longer. And by the time they've instituted these windfall profit taxes, it's not going to raise that much money. It's purely a political move. OK. And Laura, last word to you. With all the politics, what about the pain? And how long can you and the people you talk to last before you really need some direct help?
We need that direct help urgently. This is a crisis. I'm speaking to people every day in my community, people who I work with. They're on near enough minimum wage. There's people out here watching this. They'll be grafting 50, 60 hours a week, struggling to heat or eat, making these awful choices this winter. And it's a disgrace that in the 5th richest country in the world, we're now asking people like us to pay for energy companies like Shell, who made £6.9 billion in profit since April. They're allowed to get away with making these extortionate amount of profits while we're all in crisis. And we're looking to Westminster. We're not seeing any answers. And it's really important that we see a genuine change in our economy now. We need to see things being given to people so that they can go through the winter. Household budgets are just not balancing. If you look at people's wages, which have been squeezed year on year, they are not being paid enough to fork out an extra £3,000 in energy. We're now asking people to fork out £3,000 extra next year. Where does the average family find that from? Where am I going to find that? Where's my household going to find that from? Where are the people who I work with going to find it? And we need to be really coming down hard on people that are profiteering from this crisis.
Laura and Nikolai, thank you very much indeed for joining us with your views here on The Money. And Catherine, stay with us for a little bit later. But I'm Mark Longhurst, sitting in for Liam this week. Stay with us because after the break, our panel tackling the drought. Britain's farmers warning this autumn's crop harvest being threatened. Your emails too already flooding in thick and fast. Reading some of those for you here on The Money.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, and you're on The Money with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Liam. Well, it's now confirmed parts of central, southern and eastern England all now officially in drought. Well, GB News national reporter Paul Hawkins has the latest from a very dry lake in the southwest.
Here at Wimbleball Lake in Somerset in the southwest, you can see with your own eyes just how much this drought, this lack of rainfall over the past few months, certainly over July, the driest July in England since 1935, the effect it has had on the level of water, which has receded significantly, leaving behind very dry, very parched, very arid landscape. This lake is used for recreational activities, but frankly that's not the top concern at the moment. The top concern is how South West Water, indeed the water companies across England, are going to supply water to the general public and also to the many businesses and farmers, agriculture that rely on the water, because the ground here is so dry, so parched and arid. It's not just a problem for farmers who are trying to plant crops, who are trying to get crops out of the ground. The fact is, obviously that's not good for the seedlings and for the plants themselves, but the ground is so hard that it is difficult for the farmers to get their equipment into the soil, and it's frankly it's ruining the machinery, it's ruining parts of the machinery, making it very difficult to get their equipment into the ground to pull the plants out, which themselves are suffering because of a lack of rain. Now, how to change the situation? Well, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology says we're going to need significant amounts of rainfall. In fact, exceptional rainfall for 1 month up to 3 months, really, if the situation is going to correct itself, if the levels of underground water and in the rivers and in the reservoirs are going to restore themselves. There are some scattered thunderstorms forecast for next week, but short, sharp, scattered, intense bursts of rain are no good. Falling on the hard ground, they just run off straight into the rivers and straight out to sea. They don't hang around in the soil long enough to replenish the reservoirs and the underground stores of water. So what we need is light rain over a long period, over large parts of England, for at least a couple of months. That's what the experts are saying, if this situation is going to correct itself. And then, of course, there's the problem with leaks as well within the water system. 25% of the problem comes from leaks in pipes, underground pipes, which actually is a better situation than it was many years ago. But still, a lot of experts are saying that the water companies need to get better at plugging leaks, and we as consumers need to become more efficient with our water use if we're going to conserve water in the future, and certainly if we're going to have to go through this again next summer if this autumn and this winter are as dry as the last one.
Paul Hawkins, our national reporter, updating us there at a parched scene in the southwest. Catherine McBride, fellow at Centre for Brexit Policy and our economist today, still with us in the studio. Catherine, I have to ask you, is it being an Australian, are we being pommy wussers about all this?
Yeah, but you said it, not me.
I know.
Certainly our farmers have to look at how they farm and how they collect water. I spoke to a very large cereal farmer yesterday who's got 3 large properties, professional farmer, and he put in reservoirs at least 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And he's had no problem, and he's had fantastic weather, and he's going to have a bumper crop. And he was telling me often they have to put the grain into a dryer because it's so wet when they take it off.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of farmers have got these reservoirs, but some of them say they are starting to run out. And obviously, part of this drought order is it then gives the farmers, if needs be, the right to go and start extracting from any other sort of water sources, which they may actually be prevented from at the moment.
Well, it is something we have to look at, because while we're having droughts in certain parts of the country, the west coast of Scotland has had 125% of its annual rainfall. So that we have to get better at transporting water.
But that's really difficult and expensive, isn't it? Without huge pipelines or, tankers and the rest of it.
There's a lot of our infrastructure that was designed for to cope with the average, and it can't cope with the extremes. So we have roads that melt at 40 degrees.
Rail lines that buckle at that sort of temperature.
Yes, whereas Australia and Qatar and a whole lot of very hot places, I mean, they grow crops in Arizona. And they have the most fantastic irrigation systems of how they level the land and let the water dribble across, collect it at the other end, pump it round,
and
do
recirculate.
It again.
But should we reflect that we're not alone? I mean, Germany, as we've just been seeing, the Rhine has dried up, which means that, that's the lifeblood of the German engine room. They can't get coal and other supplies up and down. Their wind power has dropped because it's the wrong type of weather.
Yeah.
So even the Germans haven't actually prepared for this.
Well, in our electricity right now, we're getting this morning, one of the hottest, sunniest days of the year, we're getting 54% of our electricity from gas. So we have the same problem. We've got virtually no wind and our solar.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, is this actually, sort of busting a hole through the whole renewable argument that we just haven't got the right kind of weather? Part of the problem with solar particularly is actually storing it. You don't have battery technology to store all that electricity for a long period.
It's certainly the type of electricity we've gone in for. It was crazy to go back to these ancient ways of getting, we have nuclear. We're one of the most advanced countries in nuclear 50 years ago. We've let that drop, and that was a massive mistake. Now, hopefully, they'll get the small modular reactors up and running soon.
Well, I think Rolls-Royce are designing and building.
Rolls-Royce are doing it.
Yeah, because we were going to buy off the shelf with the French, weren't we? The EDF had been developing them.
Well, the Japanese have been developing them as well. Westinghouse has been developing them. There's a lot of companies doing this because we've been running submarines with effectively small modular reactors for 50 years.
But you can perhaps excuse local communities for suddenly saying, I don't want a nuclear reactor on my doorstep. What happens if there's an accident?
Well, you then go back to the woman we were listening to earlier. Everything's a trade-off.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want incredibly expensive, unreliable power, or do you want constant power? And also with nuclear, you can use it as desalination. We could also solve our potential drought.
Well, I'm going to trade you off against the Environment Secretary, if you pardon just an interruption. Because George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, has been speaking to reporters a few minutes ago since that drought order was declared for parts of England. He was asked if the drought was likely to be declared in further areas too.
Well, this group meets, periodically. So I would imagine that there'd be a further review sometimes toward the end of this month. It's possible, of course, that other areas could also move into drought. The approach that the Environment Agency take to help them manage these situations is to assess the stress on water resources. So we move from areas of prolonged dry weather, which is what we've all been in for most of this summer, up to drought conditions and then severe drought conditions, but we don't envisage that we'll get to that in this current year. And obviously a lot will depend on what happens over the winter and the degree of rainfall we get over the winter that could have an impact for next year. So the important thing is that the water supply remains resilient for this year. There's no real issue there. And these are precautionary steps that are being taken to ensure that we're taking care of our water resources in case we get a dry winter and then run into potential problems next year.
So that was George Eustace speaking just a few minutes ago, talking about the various 14 areas the Environment Agency has now declared as being in drought. You're watching On the Money with me, Mark Longhurst. Coming up, we'll be hearing from a leading mortgage advisor on what to do with rising interest rates. First, the latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's just gone 1:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A drought has been declared in parts of southern, central, east and southwest England. It means yet more water companies may begin announcing stricter measures to conserve supplies. It follows months of dry weather and comes as Yorkshire Water becomes the latest to impose a hosepipe ban. The UK economy shrank by 0.1% between April and June, according to official figures. That compares to the first 3 months of the year when GDP grew. The Office for National Statistics says the phasing out of COVID-19 spending is partly to blame, as well as the extra bank holiday to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. Boris Johnson's admitted the current help for people struggling with the spiralling cost of living isn't enough. Speaking on a visit to North Wales, the outgoing Prime Minister also insisted there'll be extra help for the most hard-hit households. That's regardless of who succeeds him. The topic of rising energy bills is dominating the Tory leadership contest, with both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss setting out differing strategies on how they'd respond. In the US, the former US president claims the FBI were searching for classified documents relating to nuclear weapons were a hoax. Earlier, the Washington Post reported agents raided the Florida home of Mr. Trump on Monday looking for nuclear documents. It comes just hours after the US Department of Justice had asked a federal judge in Florida to unseal the search warrant. And the shortlist of potential UK host cities for Eurovision 2023 has been released. 7 are on it: Birmingham, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle and Sheffield. The UK was chosen to host the contest after organisers decided it couldn't be staged by this year's winners, Ukraine. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.213 and €1.180. The price of gold currently stands at £1,475.59 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money with me, Mark Longhurst, in for Liam this week. Now, reform of the mortgage market is needed to turn generation rent into generation buy. That's according to veteran economist Gerard Lyons. But we might be waiting a while yet. Interest rates seemingly going up every time the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee meets for the base rate. And an official review of the mortgage market not due until next June. And if you're looking to buy your first home, well, you might want to think twice at the moment. The first-time buyer's average mortgage now hitting a record 30-year high. So what are the options left on the table? Let's hear from Nick Mendes now, who's mortgage technical manager at John Charcoal, and Catherine, our economist, still with us too. Nick, thanks for joining us. Clearly, this latest rise has concentrated a lot of minds, even though the bank in its calculations and assessments said that about 75% of the mortgage market, I think, is still on some kind of fixed rate.
Absolutely. In terms of the rate rises that we've seen, it's not going to affect a number of households, at least, albeit for another year or so. But the key thing is, when people do come out of their fixed rates, they are going to notice a jump in their monthly repayments. We've already seen, when we talk about rates, a 2-year average going from 1.3 to 3.46, typically adding £160 per month to a two-year deal. So what I would be saying to anyone with a mortgage is to keep in mind the rises. If you can make overpayments while your rates are lower, absolutely do so. But moving forward, we are going to be moving to a period of time where rates will be higher than what many people would have experienced before.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of people are only on 2-year fixed rates rather than the sort of longer 5-year that were available. But, I mean, therein lies the question, should you actually fix? Because some economists, we'll ask Catherine in a moment, are pointing to the fact perhaps, a recession means that at some stage the interest rate, the base rate, may have to come down.
That's a really good question. Very speculative, as you can imagine, in terms of where we could be moving forward. If we think about where rates have been historically, from October to where we are now, they were as low as 0.79, and base rates had multiple increases since the turn of this year. If we move into a potential recession come the end of the year, moving into 2023, could we see rates fall? Again, potentially, but I guess from a lot of clients looking at where they've got increased cost of living in terms of energy bills and wages not increasing in line with inflation, the one thing which people will want to do is ensure some level of stability. Yeah, now, fixed rates are still relatively low in comparison, but yes, there is an aspect to it to review close to the time.
Yeah, it gives you some sort of certainty in knowing what you pay. But I mean, the other part of the equation is the price of the properties. Now, I gather that that the number of properties on the market has really shrunk, and yet the prices are still pretty high because I guess that the demand is still there for thin pickings.
Yes, we have seen, there's a recent RITS report which mentioned that house prices have increased, mainly due to the fact that there's been a lack of stock and still high demand. I would say in terms of what we've seen with estate agents, likewise with brokerages, the demand is starting to slow up. So although that hasn't filtered through as yet, we will start to see property prices, at least at the rate of increase, start to slow down. And we could start to see a decrease in property prices moving into next year. So people that are thinking about getting on the property ladder, it does make sense to wait and see what happens.
Yeah. Nick from John Charcoal, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your picture of how the mortgage market is. But let's just turn to Catherine on that particular point. I mean, you know, there'll be a lot of young couples thinking, well, do we fix? How long do we fix for? And there are those economists who say, well, look, you know, if this recession really does go long and deep, they may have to think about cutting rates.
Yes, but it is a gamble. So I have been speaking to more and more people who are fixing their mortgage, because if you look back to the history of mortgage prices, these are still pretty low. People my age, your age,
absolutely.
we've seen
15%
really high
interest rates of years
So
gone by.
I would suggest that if you can fix a mortgage at something you can afford, that gives you peace of mind. However, you will see for new building that hasn't been sold yet, that's being finished, that will probably see the price come down if there's a drop-off in demand. And you'll see people who have to sell, if they're moving or have some reason to sell, they will also have to drop their prices. So it may actually really help people who have been trying to get onto the housing market.
What about Bank of Mum and Dad, as a major shareholder myself?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people obviously are looking at things like equity release, where they're sitting on houses that may actually bust the inheritance tax level as well. And one of the ways out would be, we'll release money to help the kids with perhaps a bigger deposit so they don't have to have as big a mortgage.
Well, that's true, because the major problem with people buying houses today is the deposit. It's outrageous, really. One of the reasons the asset prices have gone up so much has been the ultra-low interest rates. So in a way, getting back to normal rates, you may see houses start to come off, and you might find that we get back to what is a more normal housing market. But because we have an oligopoly of about 5 big house providers, they're not going to build so many houses that they destroy their own market. But at the same time, they're not going to let the price go so high that people can't afford it. So you will see that they'll start shuffling what they can build for the price, where they still sell. They don't want to go out of business, but at the same time, they're not getting...
And houses jammed together with no gardens as well. But,
well, that's...
Thank you for your view on that. More to come, because as the cost of living crisis appears to deepen, it's having an impact, as we've just been discussing, on rent, bills and even the price of food. Now, coming to the end of our farming week, our reporter, Dougie Beattie, has been exploring how rising costs are having an impact on the agricultural community, this time in West Wales.
The Welsh countryside is one of the most diverse farming areas in the British Isles. Its open fields and rugged hills allow many facets of the agri-sector to flourish. Some new and novel ideas are appearing, and Bryn Perry is a dairy farmer, not with cows, but sheep.
Sheep dairy, for me, is an avenue for future farming in Wales. That's why I got into it in the first place. It's on the whole, a sustainable product. It's nutrient dense. All of our sheep are grass fed, so we're trying to do as much from grass and less feed concentrates bought in and things like that. So with the right support and the right outputs that are there, I believe, and the Welsh Government, I know, are looking into it at the moment, a good potential for sheep dairy in Wales.
Here at the Nevern Show, opinions are easily found, and John Hicks sums up the issues on Welsh farms.
On the outside it looks quite rosy because the price of milk appears to be high, but people don't take into consideration the cost of producing that milk. Our feed bill has basically doubled, fertilizer trebled, and we are getting roughly about 30% more for our milk. So massive loss there.
A joined-up policy throughout the UK is being called for, but Stephen Kurtz believes regulation already in place can help.
In terms of all the 4 home nations, there is the common frameworks, which means that not one country can deviate too far away from what another country is doing to give them an overtly competitive advantage to a neighbouring home nation. So there is some sort of commonality within that sense, but everybody must remember that without farmers, without food producers, we have to import more of our food, potentially from areas which don't have the same environmental standards as ourselves and the same animal welfare standards as ourselves.
Stephen Crabb is the local MP and is not opposed to having some sort of managed markets.
The danger when you just fling open the doors and say let free markets rule and run rampant is that the global markets can be a pretty unforgiving place, and certain sectors I do think do need to be cushioned and protected, but that doesn't make you make me an economic nationalist. I still believe in markets, but it's about being pragmatic and striking the right balance.
A new generation of farmers is now appearing, and Carol Davis sees some positives on the horizon.
I think the market is fluctuating a lot recently, and we lamb quite early, so we can sell our lambs quite early, but sometimes that doesn't always work out because the market changes so drastically from week to week. But I do feel like maybe we as young people or different businesses within the industry could be working at marketing, and I think this has been something that's going on for ages, but marketing the lamb is so important now.
Nessie Reid sees a future, but believes it's all about the diversity and marketing.
I think as a small producer, especially in West Wales, you're having to constantly come up with new ideas. You're having to constantly be really, really adventurous. And often you can't just have one business. So we have the cheese, we have the cows, we have the distillery, we're thinking about camping. You know, it's this idea that like, if you're a farmer and you want to make money, you set up a camping business. It's very hard to be a small producer in West Wales, and so you're always needing to think about your social media, getting your message out, marketing. You might have the best product in the world, which we think we have, well, I think we have, but you have to market it, and if you don't market it, then you might as well be selling, popcorn.
Dougie Beattie, GB News.
And the parched fields there of West Wales. Well, now it's time for On the Money's daily interview series, Money Talks. And today we're joined by Fiona Eastham, founder of Food Thoughts, a brand focused on baking goods with a wealth of experience in the food industry and developing brands, because Fiona started off her career in a completely different sector. She worked for Shell UK Oil and then moved on to Charterhouse Bank as a consultant to KPMG. And with squired business-to-business sales and marketing skills, Fiona has moved into the world of food now, running one of the oldest fair trade cocoa and cacao companies in the world on a mission to provide high-quality and fairly traded ingredients, fair to farmers who we've just been seeing are certainly facing some challenging times. She's joining us in the studio. Fiona Eastham is our latest guest on Money Talks. Fiona, thanks for being with us. As we were just saying there in West Wales, seeing how difficult things are for our domestic farmers. First, let's just get your thoughts on food supply particularly. I mean, we know about Ukraine with the grain situation, and now our domestic growers and fruit farmers and wheat growers and barley and so on, they're in real trouble with these drought conditions.
Yes, absolutely. And the inputs into any manufactured products are going to be hit. So there's unintended consequences. Then the direct crops. The whole world is so interconnected that nobody is going to escape this. We're just going to suffer it differently.
Yeah. And what's your estimate as to the industry being able to absorb costs before they have to really pass those on to the customer in the supermarkets and so on?
Well, that's a good question. Consumers are under tremendous pressure. Yeah. Retailers are under tremendous pressure. Manufacturers are. Nobody passes on costs frivolously. I know certainly for us, we absorbed an awful lot of cost before we had to eventually go and say, look, come on, we can't sustain this because you've got increased cost of storage, transportation, ingredients, and certainly for us at Food Thoughts, we've got to keep up our commitment to our communities so that they're not suffering, because you can't just turn on sustainability and fair trade. It's a long-term commitment.
Yeah, and we've got Food Thoughts cocoa powder here, and I can see you've got the stamp on there, fairly traded, widely recycled, 100% organic. Dare I ask, is the whole issue of fair trading a bit of a luxury now when people are looking for the cheapest brand that they can get hold of on their supermarket shelves?
OK, well, price is not the only thing that determines things. Yes, everyone's under pressure, but I think people are looking more and more at value. So not all cocoa powders are equal. If you can get a brown cake, does it taste like chocolate? That's one thing. But I would have thought exactly that when you're under pressure, but what we found from research 8 years ago with one particular retailer, I was surprised how the demographics, how loyal people are to a brand and the values. So people, I think, are even more committed. Lots more people in this country are getting more interested in where their food comes from.
Yeah, and how good the quality is.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
And almost in this crisis, you kind of still want to know that you're doing a little bit of good.
And do people still like the treats? You know, chocolate
Absolutely.
and cocoa. You
Yeah.
might think, well, that's going to be off the list as a luxury, and we're staying with what we really need. But you know, people want to have a bit of relief. don't they, from all
Absolutely.
this
Well,
doom and gloom.
there's that lipstick effect. You know, when things are bad, and it's bad for all of us. Everyone's going to feel this downturn, but we're all going to feel it differently. And so you still
And we
want
might need
treats.
that cup of hot chocolate
You
if we
do.
can't turn the heating on. So.
Well, and part of my thought is that, you know, you buy the best quality ingredients you can. And obviously through the pandemic, we started, baking was fantastic. People have come to baking. It's something you can do with the family, do with the children, etc.
Yes,
it's
and
an
perhaps
affordable treat.
more people ought to learn to buy those ingredients,
Yeah,
and then
rather-
actually, instead of going buying an off-the-shelf cake, you know, you can actually bake it quite easily yourself. Even though, dare I say, the electricity is going to be a bit expensive for the oven. However, I mean, the other interesting part of your story is it's quite a jump. You were an oil executive, effectively, and then you became a financial guru as well, helping other businesses. I have to ask you what your assessment is of the current thing on windfall tax, and particularly pointing to the petrochemical industries,
Yes.
BP and Shell, with the profits they made. And now, obviously, we're looking at perhaps windfall tax on electricity generating. Are you with Liz Truss saying profit should not be a dirty word?
I certainly believe that profit shouldn't be a dirty word, but I also believe that we should have the windfall taxes because, as I understand it, windfall taxes are created. It's not that a company's done some good, it's circumstances beyond their control. And even Bernard Looney from BP said that none of their investment plans will be affected. So if it did raise $2 billion, it's a spit in the ocean, but I think it would be psychologically very important for the mass of the population.
And because, I mean, they've had a share buyback, which normally means they've got so much money they don't know what to do with it. So it could have gone somewhere else.
Exactly. So I think it's very important. So no, I don't believe profit is a dirty word, but I think in this circumstance there should be a windfall tax. As I said, it's a spit in the ocean, but I really think it's very important that it's seen to do that.
Yeah, and of course that could be a one-off rather than a continuing tax like a higher corporation tax,
Exactly,
for instance.
yes.
Yeah.
I think they should be welcoming it.
Oh, really? And that's your advice from within the oil and petrochemical industry, or because of what you've learned elsewhere going to other businesses?
I think it's really just as a much more politicised and interested individual in the UK. I mean, how we can't be interested now, every part of our life is affected. So it's more as an individual, because my time in Shell was a very long time ago.
Yeah. But obviously you carry it with you. The other thing is that this sort of mentoring, I guess, that you've done and helping other businesses. What are the lessons that you've learned there that may actually help people and come into play now, as everyone really is looking at very quite dire circumstances?
OK, well, food and drink businesses and trading in the UK and trying to get into supermarkets, it's a tough business. It really, really is. And everyone loves watching things like Dragon's Den, and that's only a tiny bit of the story, well edited, etc. It's a very tough business, and it's wrong to typify retailers as the bad guys. Everything has to earn a place on the shelf.
Yeah, but is it the fact that the supermarkets really dictate supply and pricing and can squeeze someone trying to sort of get into the market, for instance?
Oh yeah, they're very, very tough, but you've always got to have a business case as to why you're on there. So my concern at the moment is that you're going to get individual smaller companies where lots of the innovation comes from. They're going to be squeezed out of the market because the retailers are going, right, we're rationalising our ranges, but they will lose some of their customers.
However, Iceland have rationalised for a particular reason the £1 product range, because they see it as social justice, that they feel they have a social conscience to help people on lower incomes to be able to still provide them with regular food.
Well, I think the supermarkets could look at the way they respond. So everyone's looking for price increases. None of them will be frivolous. The supermarkets will want to keep the core items as low as possible to help the cost of living. So maybe, in fairness, they should look at their premium, maybe their premium products, maybe those can withstand a little bit more of the price increase.
Those favourites that you talk to, that you like a certain brand of, and we won't mention it, cocoa powder or chocolate powder, for instance. Yeah.
So my concern is there'll be a one-size-fits-all. It's kind of a race to the bottom. You've rationalised your ranges. You've killed off lots of companies who are creating things or have a strong niche product. Where are those people going to be afterwards?
Yeah. Last thought: how are you doing? Are you doing okay?
Well, happily, we have very loyal and broad consumers, but since the heyday of the pandemic, if I dare say that, of baking, sales have gone down, but they are holding up well.
Excellent, glad to hear. Fiona, thank you for bringing us your story and talking about the oil and petrol industry as well. Quite a heady mix, cakes and oil and petrol. Great stuff, thank you very much indeed. Now, lots of you with your views, particularly on the drought being declared in parts of the UK in this past hour or so. Alex, first of all, been in touch with us to say Scotland's biggest export could be water. Treble exclamation marks. It's got the wettest climate in Europe, always the wettest place in the UK, even summer born is rain. Hilary, heaven help us with useless Eustace, Environment Secretary to you, and the Environment Agency in charge. While Jeff says, here's an idea, build a reservoir or two. Let's pay for the things we need, not the things that we want. Nuclear, nuclear, nuclear. It isn't rocket science. I'll have one on my doorstep. Well, we've got the Rolls-Royce plants maybe that might be heading your way at some stage. And on energy, Liz saying sanctions have not worked. This is, of course, with Russia and Ukraine, because our government and energy companies have invested nothing into any sustainable energy supplies except wind, which are not good enough. Well, thanks for all your emails today. Keep your reaction coming through. And just to obviously reiterate, we've got, I think, 14 areas having now been declared by the Environment Agency in drought. The list, we're being told, Devon and Cornwall, Solent, South Downs, Kent, South London, Herts, North London, East Anglia, Thames, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire and the East Midlands. All just too dry. That's all we've got time for this week, but don't forget to tune in on Monday at 1 when Liam will be back in the hot seat, a very hot seat after this weekend, and bringing you the latest business and consumer news. But until then, have a very good weekend. This is GB News. I'm Mark Longhurst, and you're on the money.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Hot and sunny once again for the vast majority, with 35 Celsius possible in places today and tomorrow. A couple of exceptions, it will stay much cooler for the far north of Scotland with cloud, some outbreaks of rain here, although not a great deal, and some mistiness around northeastern coasts, so eastern Scotland and northeast England will see some mist and low cloud, not everywhere, but certainly a signal for some of that to linger around these coasts, keeping things much cooler here as well. But elsewhere it's sunny and it is very hot. Temperatures widely reaching 30 to 33 Celsius, and in the south 34 or 35 Celsius are possible. The hot spot, I think, somewhere around the Midlands into the West Country and London. Into the evening, and there will be some outbreaks of rain close to the Northern Isles as well as the Outer Hebrides, but this will generally be light and patchy, and around these North Sea coasts once again mist, low cloud, fog creeps in, but elsewhere clear spells and a very warm night to come with temperatures in places staying up in the mid to high teens. The start of Saturday brings some mist around these North Sea coasts, and generally it will retreat back to the beaches, with most places inland seeing sunny skies. Some rain for a time for Shetland, but otherwise, although it will stay cloudy and cool in the north, most places are dry, and temperatures once again reaching 35 Celsius in places. Enough to spark a shower or two for the North Pennines, for the southern uplands, for example, where these occur, and they will be very isolated. They're likely to bring some very heavy rainfall, drifting north into central Scotland during Saturday evening. And then a more concerted breakdown in the weather during Sunday, Monday and Tuesday. Hot at first, but an increased risk of some very heavy thunderstorms.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views